I wanted to ask you, and I kind of wanted to get into this just immediately because it was kind of the buzz for a minute here. And, a lot of people go on Joe Rogan that are wrong. And I'd kind of like to see somebody go on there who's right. And we saw like Wes Huff just recently went on there. So my real question is, when are you going to go on Joe Rogan?
Well, I'm still waiting for Joe Rogan to reach out. I might have to. I have to get more famous before he cares about my existence, but we'll see. I'm trying. I just got on YouTube recently. About a year ago, so I'm starting to put out videos and build my online presence. But I suspect that eventually he's going to have some counter apologists on there. But my guess is, and this is just a guess, is he'll probably prefer somebody with a PhD. But luckily, there are a lot of people with PhDs in this field of study that would love to come on Joe Rogan and correct the mistakes of Wes Huff. So if it's not me, it might be somebody else. It could be Kip Davis. It could be Josh Bowen. There's a lot of qualified people that have studied the Hebrew Bible in depth that can go on the show and give a pretty swift correction.
Okay, so Wes Huff was in a debate with Billy Carson, this dude right here. Right. And then this moment was the moment that I guess got him on the show. Right. So here we go.
According to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible.
Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically? Refer to the Sinai Bible. Would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus? Like the codex that comes? Okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification, because I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I asked for clarification is because Sinaiticus in particular is just a 4th century Greek manuscript. Its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from.
Okay, so that was it. He reached behind him, right? And grabbed the thing, grabbed his copy, right? And it's funny because I watch your channel a lot, right? And it always kills me like the way that you'll do the TikTok point, right? It's just like this point thing, the TikTok, and you do it in real time though, where they're just like, okay, the Bible, the Bible says this, and you're like, oh, you mean this verse right up here? Check it out, like in real time. And it reminds me of something like that, like pulling the shit just from right behind you. You just got it floating above your head because you're already ready for it. How do you do all that shit? How do you get it like so fast?
Well, that's a good question. And I tell you what, so my live streams and my debates, I typically do topics that are in my wheelhouse. I try not to debate people on topics that aren't my area of specialty, right? So, and this was good advice that somebody gave me back when I was in high school. The first time I ever had to like preach a sermon, I was like terrified. And I was like, I don't know what word should come out of my mouth. And my youth pastor at the time said something really good that I never forgot. He said, just talk about what you know. Say something that you're confident about. And so that's what I do with, most of my online presence as well. Like I try to stick to the topics that I know. That way, when I speak, not only do I know it because it's already in my head, but I can also go to my resources and I can tell you, oh, well, this is how I know it. This is where I got it from. And these are the scholars that agree with my opinions. And so it's not that I have this vast knowledge, that at my fingertips. It's more or less that I've tried pretty well to stick to my area of specialty and try not to go out of it. So, for example, I've got lots of critical editions of the Hebrew Bible, and I've got copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls and various manuscripts that I can pull off the shelf. But my area of expertise is not in the Greek New Testament. So, like, for example, if you want to talk about, okay, is the longer ending of Mark 16 in the earliest Greek manuscripts, and when did they start showing up? Like, I could do that. I could have that conversation. Okay. But as it turns out, like I would have to do a little bit more a deeper dive into it since I've spent most of my time studying the Old Testament. I couldn't just pull it off a shelf and show you. But that's the strength that Wesley Huff brings to the table, is he did study the New Testament. He does know some of this stuff. The problem is he kept making mistakes.
Right. I've heard. Yeah. Okay. So because one of the mistakes that I wanted to bring up to you, because I've heard, okay, I'm trying to think of now what it was. It was Isaiah was word for word from 1,000 years prior, which already
Certainly
just
it's not.
my bullshit meters just already. Yeah, okay. So like, already I'm like, I don't know, man, that sounds bullshit. But so I also saw that Alex O'Connor had brought that up, and then a bunch of other people were kind of responding to him saying that, oh man, you're just being overly critical and stuff like that. So like, where is the line there? Like, is it how
Right.
exact is it? I'm just
Well,
curious.
I want to show you something. So this is a really interesting volume. It was done by Eugene Ulrich. He was a scholar from Notre Dame who studied the Dead Sea Scrolls extensively, and he wrote a lot of books on the Dead Sea Scrolls. But this particular volume here is really good because he actually shows you the textual variants that are in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So let me go to probably about where Isaiah is showing up. Okay, so now there's Isaiah. There we go. We'll just jump down to Isaiah 38 here. So in the actual text, he's listing all the variants, and you can see that a lot of these are in the Masoretic text, as labeled in the subsection of variants. And so just in chapter 38 alone, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so literally every page of Isaiah, we can find where the Dead Sea Scrolls are diverging from the actual Masoretic text. But look at all the breaks in the Dead Sea Scrolls. See how we keep having these vacancies, and we keep having like spots where the text isn't even filled in. That's because what we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're not actually complete, right? So to say that, the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed that there was a word for word copy from the Masoretic text isn't necessarily true. And we do have a copy of the Great Isaiah Scroll. That's 1Q Isaiah 8 that appears to be mostly complete. But even with that, if you compare 1Q Isaiah A, there's many differences to the actual Masoretic text, which is why scholars typically refer to the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, which he mispronounced in his live stream because he's never actually used it. And in the Biblia Hebraica, there's a critical apparatus at the bottom of it that shows all the textual variants that could be considered for the actual Hebrew text that's being translated. And then you've also got the notes from the actual Masoretics as well. So the fact of the matter is, anyone who studied the manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible knows that the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic texts, there's lots of divergencies. There's passages that are completely missing. There's passages that were added later. And what we have in the Masoretic text that's been handed down to us is not completely clear if it was what was retained in the Dead Sea Scrolls completely. And it's also, there's divergencies as well in the Greek manuscripts. If you read the Greek Septuagint and compare it to the Hebrew text, there's divergencies as well. So all that to say, not to bore everyone with Greek and Hebrew, all that to say is like just a passing familiarity with the Hebrew text is all you need to know that there was not, Isaiah was not a word for word copy in the Dead Sea Scrolls as it was in the Middle Ages in like the Aleppo Codex or the Leningrad Codex.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, because like some of them were saying like, oh, it's just like a spelling error. That's like what they kept saying as a correction. I was like, I don't think that's right, man. Like, I don't know. I'll have to ask. That's why, I love having y'all on here so I can ask these questions.
Yeah, and some people have already gone through some of the more troubling differences. I think Alex O'Connor recently did a video showing how some of the passages were actually removed or added, and I know Myth Vision, I think, has gone over some of them as well. So all you need to do is, in fact, you can get yourself a copy. I've got one here. It's really cheap. At least I thought I had a copy. Get yourself a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. That's the name of the book that I can never find on my shelf when I need it. Here it is.
Oh, there you go.
So just grab a Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, and
cool.
in it you've got an English translation of Isaiah. from what is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in this particular English translation, so if you can't read Hebrew, this will still give you all of the textual variants from the various manuscripts, right? So you don't have to have a critical edition of the Hebrew. You can actually use this, the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. And guess who else is participating in this project? Eugene Ulrich, as he's the guy who did biblical Qumran scrolls. So these three scholars, Peter Flint, Martin Ebeg, and Eugene Ulrich, they're phenomenal scholars who's spent countless number of hours studying the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's a really good resource for people who can read English, but they can't read Hebrew. And they just want to know, hey, what does it actually say in the Dead Sea Scrolls? And are there divergencies?
Right. Yeah. Because, well, I remember that was like when I was growing up, I remember everybody would talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls being like, oh, no, it verified everything. That's how we know like what we believe is true, you know? And I wasn't honestly, again, like back then, I didn't know like what it was or anything, but I would cite it, you know, because again, that's like what you do. You just pretend to know stuff. And just out of curiosity, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, did it have Daniel? Was that included, Joel?
Yeah, there was some Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And one of the most interesting things, too, is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've got some Greek fragments of Daniel as well. And we've got some additional Daniel lore that doesn't show up in the Bible. So Daniel is like this growing tradition. Like they keep adding to the book of Daniel, which is why if you get a Bible that's got the Apocrypha, so I've got the New Oxford Annotated Bible here that includes the apocryphal works. And in the apocryphal works, you're actually going to find that there is a couple additions to Daniel. And so there, you've got like, I think most people know Susanna, and most people know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but there's actually additions to that story. And let's see what they're calling it in this Bible. They do go by various names. I think Bel and the Dragon is the most popular of the Daniel editions.
It's got a dragon? Oh, that's awesome. It's like History of Middle Earth is what it sounded like. That's awesome.
Yeah. So let's see here now. There's some other editions. You've got the Prayer of Azariah, the Prayer of Manasseh. That's an alphabetical list, but yeah, the Song of the Three Jews is the one I was thinking of. So there's the Prayer of Azariah and the Song of the Three Jews. So we've got like these additions to the Daniel kind of lore that show up in the Apocrypha, and there's even more that show up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And guess what shows up in the Dead Sea Scrolls? There's a really interesting text called the Prayer of Nabonidus. And in the Prayer of Nabonidus, we learned that Nabonidus is actually the character that Daniel is portraying when it talks about Nebuchadnezzar going mad and leaving his country for a period of 7 years and having his son stay back as co-regent, that's Belshazzar. Right. All of that actually was about Nabonidus originally, and it got changed in Daniel history to be about Nebuchadnezzar. But if you go to 4Q 242, you've got the Prayer of Nabonidus being told. And so like, if you wonder, like, how is it that, you know, Daniel is attributing this stuff to history that doesn't make any sense? Because Nebuchadnezzar didn't have a child named Belshazzar. Nebuchadnezzar didn't have a co-regent. He never left the kingdom. Where are we getting these ideas from? Oh, because originally it was actually about Nabonidus, and Nabonidus did have a son named Belshazzar. Nabonidus did get sick for a period of time and have to leave the country. Nabonidus did come into contact with Jews eventually and recognize that, you know, that they had a unique religion. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, when you look at Daniel, actually contradict what is in the Bible.
Really? Okay. That's fascinating, because that was
Pretty
the
wild.
book that was like the main book that I was using back then. I was using the Dead Sea Scrolls to validate what I thought was like the most kick-ass of all the prophecies of the four kingdoms, which I was like, it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, man. So, you know, they told the future. It has all of the different kingdoms and and like the medals and the stuff that represent those different nations in the statue. How does that one work? Because I am curious about that, because I've heard that it's like what you were just saying, that it was from different time periods, and there were like different languages like that were kind of like updating, like, oh, this medal like represents this kingdom over here, but that was like after the fact. Is am I right on that, or how does that work?
So you're right. You've kind of got two topics melded in with this question. The language is interesting because at the very beginning of Daniel, we've got a different language, right? So Daniel is written partly in Hebrew and partly in Aramaic. And it's kind of interesting that the parts that are written in Hebrew are like this Mishnaic Hebrew that was not really popularized until after the fall of the Greek Empire. And it's really interesting as well that it just happens to be dealing with stuff happening at the fall of the Greek Empire, not at the time of Daniel.
Oh,
but the empires that you bring up, almost all scholars agree. This is not something that scholars are really debating. Almost all scholars agree that the four kingdoms are Babylon, and then Media, and then Persia, and then Greece. And in fact, in most good academic study Bibles, they'll literally just tell you this. They'll tell you who the kingdoms are and why that is the case. And here's an interesting note from the New Oxford Annotated Study Bible. It says the other kingdoms, although not named, are Media, the silver, Persia, the bronze, and Greece, iron and clay. The fourfold pattern of kingdoms appear also in the Sibylline oracles, oracle number 4, Babylonian and Greek writings, and listen to this, and also in the Qumran scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the scroll that specifically he's referring to is 4Q Pseudo-Daniel. So in 4Q Pseudo-Daniel, we find an explanation of the four kings being Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. And even deeper is John J. Collins. So if you get John J. Collins's commentary on the book of Daniel, he actually documents not just in Jewish literature, but also in Greek and Roman literature, where they describe these four kingdoms as being four distinct kingdoms. It's not until a much later date, not until already way into the Christian period, did people start reading the fourth kingdom as Rome, and that Media and Persia would be the same kingdom. That's a modern convention.
Really? Okay. And didn't it say, it says in there what they represent, right? Like it's like these medals represent this kingdom, right? Like you said, that's in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
okay.
It's funny too, because it does get explicit. Like when you read Daniel chapter 8 and read Daniel chapter 9 and 10, there's always a last kingdom mentioned. And the last kingdom in those prophecies is always the kingdom of Greece. Greece is the shaggy goat, the last kingdom. And so like in Daniel 8:9, when it talks about the last kingdom, says the male goat is the king of Greece, and his great horn between its eyes is the first king. Cool. So easily enough, the last kingdom is the kingdom of Greece. What does it say about that? As for the horn that was broken, in place of which four others arose, four kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. That's the breakup after Alexander. So this last kingdom is very clearly Greece. And then we find the same thing in chapter 10. It says, I have come because of your words, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. So Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia. I have come to help you to understand what is to happen to your people at the end of the days, for there is further vision for the days. And then he talks later about having to do war against the prince of Greece. So there's never a mention of Rome anywhere in the text. Everything is about Greece. It says in verse 20, now I must return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I am through with him, the prince of Greece will come. No, there's no prince of Rome. There's no prince of the Kittim. It's the prince of Greece.
Huh. Okay. Because I always hear that tied to like Revelation. Is that the one that's like supposedly tied to it's like the last kingdom of the four kingdoms is supposed to be the final kingdom, right? Is that is that some weird evangelical interpretation of it?
It really is. And you know, the New Testament needed, in order for Daniel to be fulfilled in some sort of a messianic or Christian era, it needed to move the final kingdom to Rome, because that was the time that they were writing, right? So what do? You know, they say, well, you know, if you ignore some of the passages that clearly state that the last kingdom is Greece, and you squint really hard and say that words don't mean words, well, then you can get to a place where you say, no, the fourth kingdom is actually going to be Rome. But it just is not really true. And Daniel chapter 9, kind of the proof text, right? Well, Daniel chapter 9, they have no idea what to do with it, because they'll get down to verses like 25 and 26, and they'll say, it mentions the Messiah, therefore it must be fulfilled in Jesus's time period, right? But
I see.
When you're reading it in context, it's not, right? It says 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, and bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. That's the new temple. And it says, know therefore, and understand, from the time that the word went out to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem to the time of an anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Now, this is interesting, because in some Bibles, like the King James Bible and others, it'll say until the Messiah prince. Wait a minute. That's not what it actually says. It just says Mashiach Nahid in Hebrew, which means a anointed leader. It's not it'd be HaMashiach if it was the Messiah.
Oh,
so
right, because that just means the anointed, right? Like the Messiah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And listen to when it's going to happen, though, right? It says from the time that the word went out to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, that was 605 BCE. That was Jeremiah's prophecy as they were being carried away. Everything in Daniel chapter 9 is about the prophecy of Jeremiah coming true or not coming true, because the prophet is sitting in like the year 522, just 70 years, a little over 70 years after they were taken captive in Babylon. And the prophecy from Jeremiah doesn't seem to be coming true, because in chapter 25, Jeremiah says, after 70 years, you'll come back. And they're going to be completely restored. And it doesn't really appear that they've been completely restored in 522. So he's like, what's going on? And then he's like, well, I read in the law of Moses that all of the cursings of the law of Moses has come upon us. In verse 11, it says, all Israel has transgressed your law and turned aside, refusing to obey your voice. So the curse and the oath written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out on us. And that's from Leviticus 26, where God says, and also Deuteronomy 28, if you do not turn back from me in your suffering, then I will multiply your afflictions by 7. Okay, so now Daniel's like, it's not 70 years, it's 70 times 7. Our affliction is going to be for 490 years. So whatever, I know, right?
Work.
So
wow.
Whatever is happening in Daniel chapter 9, it concludes after a maximum of 490 years after 605. Absolutely everything in Daniel chapter 9 has to happen before the year 115 if you're taking 490 years to be a straight linear time period. So you're off by Jesus by at least 111 years. Jesus wasn't born until about 4 BCE.
Right.
So it doesn't work. You can't put Jesus in this text anywhere. And the first Messiah, the first anointed one that shows up only after the first week. That's 49 years. So Jesus didn't show up in the middle of the 6th century BCE, but that's who this is talking about. So they're like, okay, well, there's another anointed person in here. Let's see what it says, right? It says, after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off. Oh my gosh, it must be Jesus.
Gotta be again. It's too similar.
But
anointed.
as long as you ignore the context, then yes, you can say it must be him, right? Ignoring the fact that Jesus actually was never anointed to begin with. He was never a priest. He was never a king. He was never actually anointed, which is a major problem. But
okay.
most scholars read the 62 weeks and the first week as running parallel, meaning after the first week is over, you'll get the first anointed person. After 62 weeks, then you're actually going to get the next anointed person. Now, this is really interesting because if you take 62 weeks, right, that's a period of years, and just multiply that by 7, you get 434 years. Now, if you take the beginning of their affliction, which is where the counting starts in 605, and take a 434 off of it, you end up in the year 171. This is really important. Watch this, okay? It says, after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and will have nothing, and the troops of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war, and desolations are decreed. He will make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he will make sacrifices and offerings cease. This literally happened around 171. Antiochus Epiphanes IV rolled on into Jerusalem, took over the temple, made people cut off sacrifices and offerings. He exiled Onias III, that was the high priest, exiled him, killed him, put his brother Jason in place of him. And then he made a covenant with Jason for a period of about 3.5 years to end the sacrifices. And then after about 3.5 years, the Maccabees revolted and they're like, we're not having this anymore. And so everything that's talking about here in Daniel chapter 9 is what happened to them under the rule of the Greeks. This is not about something happening later. So this prophecy terminates between 171 and 164. That's actually what's happening here. So to read Jesus into this is completely fallacious. And most academic resources will explain this pretty clearly. But if you talk to a typical pastor or you talk to like a preacher, they don't know any of this because they've not read the academic sources. They don't know anything from history. They've not read the book of Maccabees. They've not read Josephus. Maccabees explains this. I don't know if anyone's read Maccabees 1 and 2, but if you go to First Maccabees at the very beginning of the book, it describes everything in Daniel 9.
Really?
So at the very beginning, if you go to First Maccabees 1:20, it says, after subduing Egypt, Antiochus returned with 140 in the 143rd year. He went up against Israel and came to Jerusalem with a strong force, and he arrogantly entered the sanctuary and took the golden altar. And then it says in verse 25, he shed much blood and spoke with great arrogance. They keep describing him as being arrogant. That's interesting because in Daniel 7, verses 8 and 11, this evil person that arises from the last kingdom, what's it call him? It says that he was arrogant, speaking arrogant words, because it's Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And it says in verse 28, it says, even the land trembled for its inhabitants, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. 2 years later, the king sent the cities of Judah a collector of tribute, and he came to Jerusalem with a large force, and deceitfully he spoke peaceable words to them. So he tried to form a covenant with them, just like it was described in Daniel chapter 9.
Wow.
But what actually happened? Well, what happened in verse 39, her sanctuary became desolate like a desert. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into a reproach, her honor into contempt. And then it says in verse 41, then the king wrote this to the whole kingdom, that all should be one people, and they should give up their particular customs. And all the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. So this idea that this king is going to come in, he's going to end the sacrifices and offerings and whatnot, it actually happened. And then what about the abomination that desolates?
That's
verse 40.
Yeah. Okay. That's so wild. That's
Listen to verse 48 and 54. 48 says, and to leave their sons uncircumcised, they were to make themselves abominable by everything clean and profane, so that they would forget the law and change all the ordinances. And then in 54, talking about what transpired, it says, now in the 50th day of Kislev, in the 145th year, they erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar of burnt offering. Everything in Daniel chapter 9 came true under Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and you can read about it in the Apocrypha. You can read about it in Jewish histories. You can read about it in Josephus and elsewhere.
And that's what they're waiting on right now, is to happen specifically right now because of everything that's going on. But wow, that's crazy. I had no idea. That was like, my dad used to teach on Revelation, and that's all he talked about was Daniel and all that, and that's the last kingdom. We're waiting on that to happen. The desolation, the statue and all that type of stuff, breathing life into the statue.
Right.
Yeah, all that. It's just like,
well,
wow.
that's the crazy thing. If I'll say one more thing on Daniel chapter 9. I love the book of Daniel, by the way. It was one of my favorite books, Daniel and Isaiah. But if we go back to Daniel, at the very end of Daniel chapter 9, go to verse 27. Something very interesting happens. Christians have to go to Daniel 27, and they have to say, well, the 490 years somehow ends on Jesus, but then also it goes like another 1,000 or 2,000 years later, because they don't think verse 27 got fulfilled. It says he will make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he will make sacrifice and offering cease. Well, they think that happened when Jesus came, which it didn't really happen the way they think it did, but it says in their place there will be an abomination that desolates until, listen to this, until the decreed end is poured out upon the desolator. Well, the decreed end must be poured out upon the desolator. The desolator is the person who set up the offering. It's the person who set up the abomination. The abomination that desolates has a person that did it, and that person is called the desolator. So if that person wasn't wiped out within the 490 years, then this prophecy certainly didn't come true.
Right. So it just, and then they're just adding a bunch of time to it, like just cutting that out, then adding a bunch of time, and then saying it's going to be
right.
Wow. Jesus Christ. I like the desolator, though. That's pretty cool. That's sounds like a Spawn character or something. That's pretty
That'd be a really good band. Just call it the Abomination of Desolation.
Right? Oh yeah, that probably is a metal band. Now that I think about it, it's just like, I don't even know why that's definitely band. Yeah, no, that's that's awesome.
There was a pretty wild metal band. Remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was I want to call it an anti-Christian metal band. Now I have to look up the name of it. Let's see.
Like Lamb of God. I remember them.
I'll think of it as we're talking, but there was one. Lamb of God was definitely one of them, but there was another one that was like, I don't know what the word to use for it is, but like it was like a horror band almost. Like the goal of the band was to really shock you as to what they were saying.
Oh, are you talking about Cradle of Filth?
That's it. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I've seen them. Yeah, they're insane, man. Yeah, it's almost like a Guar kind of performance. Or it's just like, whoa, okay, I need to see that. That's stuck in my brain now, like for all eternity. Jesus, that's awesome.
Yeah, they were wild.
Oh yeah.